March 2nd, 1945, 4:16 a.m. Northern Luzon. The sky was black, the river below silent, and one man lay face down in the wet earth, eyes locked on a wooden footbridge, in his hand, a rice sack, on it a map drawn in charcoal, angles, slopes, symbols, the kind of thing a militia captain once mocked as child's scribble. 3 years earlier, this bridge had led to his village. Then the Japanese came, burned it, shot those who fled, left him nothing. Now, Segundo Regala waited in silence. Within 72 hours, 47 enemy soldiers would die. Most would never see him. Some wouldn't even understand what had gone wrong. One of them, the officer who had torched his childhood home, would drown without a wound on his body. They never saw the scribbler coming, but the forest had, and it remembered every step they took. They didn't call him a coward. That would have taken him seriously. They just called him useless. In January 1945, Segundo Regala approached the guerrilla camp in northern Luzon. He wasn't carrying a rifle, just a satchel, inside scraps of cloth, charcoal stubs, a broken ruler. He laid the maps on the table. The militia captain glanced once, snorted, "We need fighters, not scribblers." The others laughed. One crumpled a sketch. Another asked if he was an artist. Regala didn't speak. He just packed the scraps back in silence. Lt. Wallace Gibbs of the U.S. Advisory Unit said it more politely but not more kindly. "We'll relay your recon to command. In the meantime, stay out of the way." Segundo stayed, not because they wanted him, but because the terrain did. It was familiar. The ridges, the water lines, the wind through the ravines. It was the same forest where his village once stood, before the Japanese burned it down in March 1942. He had been 20, came home to smoke, the smell of burned rice. His father's compass half melted, his mother's scarf tied around a tree stump. There was no grave, just memory. For 3 years he disappeared, learned the riverbanks again, marked every shortcut, notched trees where patrols passed, memorized how gunfire echoed in fog. When the Americans returned in late 1944, the resistance reformed, but they wanted firepower. Regala had none. Only sketches on rice sack, inked topography, elevation guesswork, trail forks, bird migration paths. "None of this helps us kill," said the captain. But something else was killing. The ambushes were failing. Guerrilla units struck patrols, then got struck back harder. Japanese outposts were always empty until men walked into traps. One team lost for fighters in a collapsed gorge. Another vanished near the ridgeline. U.S. command suspected betrayal. Regala suspected pattern. He saw it in the dirt. Patrols reused burned trails, like ghosts afraid to stray. He marked every turn they avoided, every place they revisited. He handed over a new map, denser, cleaner, predictive. Gibbs glanced again. "We'll pass it up." They didn't. Weeks passed. More raids failed. Morale collapsed. Food ran short. Locals stopped trusting anyone with a rifle. But Regala kept drawing, because he didn't need them to believe. He only needed the Japanese to repeat themselves. Wartime systems prefer noise, metals, weapons, orders. But survival depends on listening. Segundo wasn't ignored because he lacked skill. He was ignored because his skill didn't fit the mold, until that mold started cracking. He never called it revenge. He called it the pattern. For weeks, Segundo Regala moved alone, never more than 3 hours in one place. He sketched from memory, measured slopes by how long rainwater pooled, watched leaves to read wind direction, carried no compass, just a charcoal stick, a knife, and a bamboo tube filled with folded maps. He marked 9 trails. 3 were likely patrol routes. 2 led to ravines with only one exit. The others he left blank until the birds told him otherwise. He had never fired a rifle, but he had built traps before. When he was 12, he and his uncle had carved footbridge pegs along the Pampanga River. He still remembered which beams warped after rain. In February, he returned, rebuilt to supports with dry rot, laid false planks soaked in fish oil to draw termites. When it collapsed, it wouldn't be sudden. It would be inevitable. Elsewhere, he rigged a slope above a narrow trail with oil jars sealed in banana leaves. A tripwire would snap them under the feet of men too close together. Below that trail, he left an old wasp nest, not yet active but ready with fire. At night, he mapped moonlight angles. Some traps wouldn't work unless the shadows fell right. One was timed to the sound of a specific bird that only sang before dawn. He hid the plans in tree hollows inside sealed bamboo wrapped in cloth. No words, just lines, arrows, a symbol only he understood. No one asked where he went. They had already written him off. That was the mistake. He wasn't preparing to survive. He was preparing to rewrite the forest. The first time they used his map, they didn't tell him. They just took it. On March 1st, a guerrilla squad followed the charcoal trail Regala had drawn, one that curved around the edge of a dry creek bed. They hadn't trusted him, but they had run out of options. 5 failed ambushes in 2 weeks. Morale was gone, ammunition low, and the Japanese weren't retreating. They were waiting. At 4:41, the trap sprung. A patrol of 6 Japanese soldiers moved in formation, tight spacing, slow steps. One stepped over a vine. It snapped. Above them, a dead tree fell, rigged with vines and rocks. 4 were crushed instantly. The 5th hit his head. The 6th ran. No shots fired. Regala heard the explosion from 2 ridges away. He marked the time. That night, a runner came back with the result. No one said thank you, but no one mocked him again. The next day, he planted a false trail. Bootprints pointed east, but the heel marks reversed. It led into a flooded bend near the hornet nest. At 15:22, a second patrol followed. They triggered the oil jars. The leaves erupted. Fire, smoke, stings. 3 died in the panic. 1 fell into the river and didn't come up. The last one escaped screaming. Regala stayed hidden, silent, watching from the underbrush. He had learned their timing, their lunch stops, their comfort zones. It wasn't revenge. It was sequence. Behavior, distance, light. He circled back and checked every trigger. Reset 2. Adjusted a 3rd for rain angle. At dawn, he returned to camp. No words. He handed a new sketch to the militia captain. The captain said nothing, but he didn't crumple it. On March 3rd, the Americans targeted a Japanese ammo dump west of San Luis. Regala's map showed 3 trails and 2 with possible mines, 1 flat ridge above the depot. Guerrillas used that ridge, carried no explosives. They activated a trap. Regala had left a rolled oil drum, wrapped in thornroot, placed on a slope. 1 push. The drum tumbled, hit the side of the depot, sparked on metal, ignited stored fuel. The explosion took out the stockpile and the 2 guards outside. No firefight, no wounded, just flame. Later that night, the captain approached Regala's campfire. Dropped a folded rice sack next to him. "Make another one," he said. "For tomorrow." Regala didn't reply. He just opened the sack, picked up the charcoal, and started to draw. By March 4th, the Japanese knew someone was watching them. They didn't know who. They didn't know how. But the patrols were dying. The maps they used stopped working. Trails that were safe last week became kill zones. Rivers that ran shallow now carried bodies. They sent more men. That morning, Regala intercepted 2 Filipino collaborators. They were dragging sacks of rice up the eastern ridge. He let them pass, then followed. They led him straight to a forward outpost, a temporary listening post disguised as a logging hut. He counted the steps, for guards outside, 2 radio operators, 1 man with a map board. He drew every detail. That night, the guerrillas ambushed the hut using his plan. 7 Japanese dead, no losses, but they made a mistake. They didn't burn the bodies. By morning, the enemy had recovered the tags and a fragment of a sketch, a partial drawing of the trail system, scorched but legible. The order came down from Japanese command: find the cartographer. They didn't know his name, but they called him Yami no Chizusha, the mapmaker of the dark. By evening, they had set fire to 3 villages. Suspected of harboring him, Regala watched one burn from the hill. The same smoke, the same orange light. 3 years ago, he had stood in that light. Now he stood behind it. The Americans sent Telt Gibbs to the area. He saw the burned sites. He saw the rising pattern. And for the first time, he asked to see the maps. Regala laid out 6. Gibbs didn't speak for a minute. Then, "We follow this." Meanwhile, the Japanese had dispatched a rearguard unit, experienced, disciplined, led by a sergeant trained under the Kempite. He didn't rely on formations. He didn't follow the same routes. He tracked anomalies, broken grass, pattern gaps, birds gone silent. On March 5th, he nearly found Regala. Regala had stepped on a faulty mine. The wire caught on his bootlace. The fuse clicked but jammed. He froze, waited. No explosion. He disarmed it with a twig, then cut his arm to drain the swelling. Infection had set in. He wrapped it in dried leaves, bit down on a root to stay conscious. The guerrillas were running out of grenades, out of food, out of time, but they had his maps. At 15:09, they deployed the last of his designs. 3 traps set along a river bend, 1 with a tripwire and rolling logs, 1 using thornroot, 1 with a dammed section timed to flood if triggered. By sunset, 15 more Japanese were dead. The rearguard unit fell back, and the name spread. Not just among the guerrillas, but in the enemy camps. They didn't say Regala. They said the forest watches, because by now the maps weren't just sketches, they were warnings. The lie had worked. The forged radio message had moved an entire Japanese patrol into the open. Regala watched them descend from the ridge in single file. 10 men, 1 officer, 2 trackers, Filipino collaborators armed with captured carbines. He recognized one of them, his cousin's face, same jawline, same scar on the temple from a childhood fall. Regala didn't blink. This was no longer family. This was the sweep unit, and they were heading straight into his trap. The message had warned of American paratroopers dropping near San Martin. A believable lie, the kind of thing that would trigger fear more than action. It didn't promise a battle. It implied exposure, and the Japanese feared being seen. They were no longer hunting victories. They were hiding failures. One more defeat, one more ambush. And their command in this valley would collapse. That's why they moved. That's why they split their forces. And that's why they walked straight into the old bridge path at 347. The trap had taken weeks to build, not with tools but with time. Regala had let the termites do the work. He had soaked specific beams in fish oil, cut the underside of others with a dull knife, just enough to fray but not snap. Every night he returned to check the decay. He tracked weight tolerance by watching birds land. He knew the bridge would break, but it had to break right. He waded upstream, 30 meters away, crouched behind a wall of brush. The officer crossed first, confident, light-footed. The wood flexed, groaned but held. The first tracker followed. No hesitation. The others stepped in sequence. 5 men on the span. The 6th shifted his rifle to the left side. That tiny movement sent weight to the weak beam. The center sagged, cracked. Regala tensed. The 7th man stepped. The bridge folded. It didn't snap. It collapsed slowly, like a body giving in. The plank spilled downward. The support beams split like bark under pressure. 3 men dropped instantly. 1 screamed. The rest turned. But by then the trap was only halfway done. The eastern slope exploded. 2 oil jars, hidden beneath moss, ignited as the tripwire snapped. Flames leapt outward, catching dry grass. Regala moved fast. He lit the second fuse, hand-wrapped black powder soaked into sugar paper, and tossed it toward the lower path. It didn't need to kill, just confuse. It worked. The officer tried to regroup, shouted in Japanese. Regala fired 1 round into the air, away from the trap, to draw them further in. They took the bait. 3 soldiers veered left, directly into the bamboo corridor. That corridor was lined with punji stakes, covered in mud and angled upward, to fell. The 3rd stumbled, fired back. Hit nothing. Regala had already relocated. He crept along the tree line, flank wide, legs shaking from adrenaline and dehydration. His left arm still throbbed from the infected cut. He gritted his teeth. No time to stop, no time to check the damage. This was the final phase. The last 2 soldiers broke from the group and ran uphill. 1 carried the officer's satchel. Maps. Orders. Maybe the forged message. Regala couldn't let it reach the fallback unit. He had planted 1 last fail-safe. A rock-slide trigger, disguised under leaf litter and tied to a branch system above a narrow choke point. The 2 men reached it at full sprint. Regala waited, breathed, then pulled. The rocks fell in sequence, first small, then heavy. The sound was low, like thunder buried in dirt. 1 man vanished beneath the slide. The 2nd rolled clear but hit his head on a stump, tried to rise, slipped, stood again, turned and saw Regala standing 10 meters away. No rifle, no helmet. Just 1 man holding a broken pistol. The soldier raised his weapon. Regala didn't flinch. The man's hand shook. Then he ran. Regala let him go. He walked to the site of the collapse, checked for movement, heard none. Flames had faded. Smoke still lingered. A body shifted near the waterline, coughing once, then still. He gathered the satchel, found the forged message inside, slightly burned, still legible. He smiled, just for a second. Then he took 3 small stones from the riverbed and placed them side by side beside the collapsed bridge. His code, his marker. Others would see it and know the zone was clean, that the ghosts had been cleared. Then he vanished into the trees. By sunrise, the Japanese listed 9 dead, for missing, 1 escaped. They blamed American air support. They blamed artillery. But no planes had flown that night. No shells had fallen. Only 1 man had, 1 scribbler, 1 mapmaker, 1 memory they hadn't accounted for. The bridge was gone, but the message stood. They walked where they weren't wanted, and the forest remembered. The name of the officer matched the scar. That was all Regala needed. A survivor from the burned village came forward, quietly, and pointed at a faded photograph recovered from the dead. The scar was on the left forearm, twisted from an old flame injury. He had seen it before on the night his house vanished into smoke, when a Japanese officer poured kerosene down the prayer hall and turned to laugh. 3 years later, the laugh was gone, but the scar remained. Regala didn't speak. He simply handed in a new sketch. It showed the basin east of San Jose, where the last Japanese detachment had dug in. One path in, none out. The guerrillas were hesitant. There was no fallback route on the map, no margin for failure. The Americans raised the question, what happens if it floods? Regala looked up. It will, and that was the plan. The basin was a natural bowl, shaped by centuries of water and erosion. He had fished there as a boy. The dam upstream was old, made of wood and packed stone. The flow was controlled by a spill gate with rusted hinges and brittle latches. He had checked it 2 days earlier. The gate could hold for hours, then break in seconds. He set the timing for dusk, when the patrol would be tired and their boots off. The goal wasn't drowning. It was disorder, fear, movement without coordination. That's when guerrillas strike best. He left before first light, moved alone. No backup, no rifle, just a flare, 2 fuses, a knife, and a single sketch rolled into his belt. He reached the dam at 1607, removed the bracing wedges, tied the rags soaked in oil behind the spillgate, just above the fault line. He lit the fuse at 1618. The fire crept along the wall like a shadow. The wood hissed, then groaned, then cracked. Water pressure surged behind the gate. The first peg snapped, then the second. The gate twisted, split, and released. The flood hit the basin like a hammer. It took 22 seconds for the water to reach the enemy camp. The first man it hit was washing his hands. He vanished before he could shout. The second tried to grab it free route and was pulled under. One officer scrambled to higher ground and slipped on his own equipment. The fire hadn't started yet, but the panic had. That's what Regala wanted. From his perch on the ridge, he gave the signal 3 mirror flashes. The guerrillas opened fire from 2 flanks. No overkill, no waste. Each shot was placed. The enemy was already disoriented, some barefoot, others wet, a few trying to climb trees to avoid the water. 2 grenades followed. One landed clean. The other rolled into a tent, setting off stored ammunition. Smoke curled upward. Cries rose, then stopped. 11 bodies were recovered. 2 men were pulled from the river alive. One crawled to the tree line and surrendered. Regala never entered the basin. He watched from above, counted the shapes, then walked back through the trees. The flare unused, the knife still in its sheath. By the time he returned to camp, dusk had fallen. The sky was quiet. No one cheered. There were no medals, just one long silence and a folded map placed on the table, still damp from river mist. It showed the exact contours of the basin, the pressure lines of the floodplain, and the position of every tree Regala had used for cover. At the bottom of the map was a word, not his name, just a single word in charcoal, the same one he had said when he left. Enough. No speeches were made. The American officer nodded. The militia captain offered him a rifle. Regala declined. He took the map, rolled it into a bamboo tube, and disappeared into the northern trees before midnight. No one followed. They didn't need to. His final message had been clear. The work was done. The basin was clean, and the forest once again was quiet. He returned on the 3rd day, just before dusk, walking alone along the ridge path with no weapon and no satchel. The guards didn't challenge him. They stepped aside. Word had already spread through the camp. The Japanese unit was gone. The basin was clear. The last threat in Sector 5B had collapsed without a single firefight. No one had seen it happen, but they had heard it. The dam burst, the short bursts of rifle fire, the silence that followed. They had waited for confirmation. Now it stood in front of them. Segundo Regala, soaked in river mist and dried blood that wasn't his, stepped into the command hut without a word. The militia captain looked up from his field notes and offered him a seat. Regala stayed standing. The American liaison, Elt Gibbs, removed his cap. He held a folder in his hand, Regala's maps, labeled and time-stamped. There was a form inside, a recommendation for commendation under irregular service. It wasn't a medal, just recognition, a line in the record. Gibbs slid it across the table. It's your call. Regala glanced at the page, then folded it shut. Don't write it, he said. Just read what was already there. He left the folder on the table, picked up his final map, rolled it back into the bamboo tube, then set the tube upright next to the lamp. That's all, he said. The captain tried to offer him a rifle. Regala shook his head. I don't need it now. Outside, a small group of guerrillas waited. Some he had trained without speaking. Others he had saved without meeting. One stepped forward, handed him a canteen, regalad rank, then nodded once and walked away from the firelight. No ceremony followed, no salute. He left like he had arrived, quiet, precise, and without demand. Only the captain noticed the symbol etched into the side of the bamboo tube, 3 lines and a curve. The same one found weeks later on a Japanese message board recovered near the river. The Americans couldn't decode it. The locals didn't need to. It wasn't a cipher. It was a signature. The mark of a man who had turned silence into skill, memory into a weapon, and a forest into the final word. In the months that followed, 2 other guerrilla sectors in Luzon began copying his methods. Not the traps, not the decoys, the maps. Drawn by hand, marked with terrain behavior, water flow, tree types, wind direction. Intelligence officers began to request Regala-style sketches. They never used his name. Most didn't know it, but they used his work. The Japanese adjusted again, but by then, the patterns had already shifted. Trails they once used became silent. Forests they once patrolled became empty. One Japanese report, recovered after the war, noted a symbol carved into several trees near San Jose, 3 lines and a curve. Possibly a resistance marking, it said. A void area. No one followed up. They didn't need to. By April, the rearguard patrols had withdrawn. The 16th Division lost its last hold in the Northern Valley. No artillery, no final stand, just silence, smoke, and a pattern they couldn't decode. Segundo Regala had vanished again. The last report placed him in the mountains near Balit Pass. He wasn't carrying a weapon, just a satchel and a length of bamboo. After that, the record ends. The United States Army published its post-war engineering reports in 1946. Among them was a clearing manual used by demining teams. Throughout Luzon, one of the diagrams showed a rice terrace basin, its water levels, drainage paths, and possible ambush risks. The sketch matched Regala's work, line for line. The caption read, "Source unknown." His name never made the manual. His maps were listed under local reconnaissance artifacts. His signature was gone. No bamboo tubes, no symbols, no testimony. The only official file with his name had it misspelled in the unit citation for Guerrilla. Operations in Sector 5B. His role was condensed to 1 line, provided terrain assistance to irregular forces. No mention of the traps, no record of the dam, no entry for the basin. We count kills, we archive medals, but we forget the skills that prevented both. Segundo's drawings didn't fit into categories of valor, but without them, many more would have died. History remembers results, not always the tools that made them possible, some say. He returned to Nueva Ecija and lived as a schoolteacher. Others believe he disappeared into the Cordillera Ranges, walking east until the war lines stopped. The truth is, no one knows. What remains are 12 confirmed Japanese casualties across 3 ambushes he planned. 1 dam-triggered collapse, 2 captured soldiers, and a signature the enemy came to fear without understanding. A line, a curve, a silence, that was all. But it was enough. In a municipal archive near San Jose, there's a water damage sketch stored in a plain folder. It's unsigned. The lines are faint. The paper smells like old bamboo and smoke. The caption simply reads, "Terrace Basin, March 1945. No one remembers who donated it. No note, no provenance. But the staff keep it sealed, and when asked, they point to the bottom left corner, 3 lines and a curve, drawn in haste, almost missed. It isn't listed in the digital inventory. It isn't cited in any book. But every few years, a veteran's son or granddaughter comes in asking about the flood ambush, about the forest that warned its own, about the man who never fired more than 2 bullets but collapsed a rearguard with nothing but slope and silence. The staff say they can't confirm, but they let the visitors see the sketch. They let them hold it. And every time, someone says the same thing. This shouldn't have worked, but it did. And because it did, hundreds of civilians were never found in pits, never marched from towns that vanished. No plaques, no medals, just 1 path that was never taken again. 1 basin that stayed quiet, 1 word that outlived the noise. This story shows how war systems often ignore quiet skills until they become the only thing that works. Subscribe for more true WWII stories. Comment your city and the name of someone your family never forgot.